When Alfred lifted his champagne glass and pointed at me across the shiny ballroom, laughing as he told everyone that his ex-wife was so poor, she probably sold her wedding ring to pay for a bus ride. I knew this would be the night he finally understood what he had lost. But I didn't move. I didn't react. I just stood there in my simple black dress, watching him show off to the crowd like he always did, feeling strangely calm inside. 5 years. 5 years since he gave me divorce papers on our anniversary because I couldn't give him the life he wanted. 5 years since he looked at me coldly and said I was holding him back. The lights above us sparkled. The glossy floor reflected the lights. Everyone wore clothes that cost more than most people earned in a month. Alfred stood there in his expensive suit, his arm around his new wife. Her diamond necklace shone as she laughed at his cruel joke about me. He had no idea. None of them did. Before I go on, I need to know something. Where are you watching this from right now, and what time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. And if you're already feeling something stirring in your chest, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because I promise you, the stories here will make you feel everything. Share this with someone who needs to hear about real justice, real redemption. Now let me take you back to where this all began. Because you need to understand how a woman goes from sleeping on her sister's couch to owning the very ground beneath her ex-husband's feet. 6 years ago, I was Rebecca, the girl who fell in love with ambition. Alfred was a junior analyst at Morrison Tech, working 16-hour days, dreaming bigger than the sky. I was a secretary at a law firm, and we met at a coffee shop between our jobs. He had fire in his eyes back then. He talked about changing the world, about building something that mattered. I believed in him so completely that I used my entire savings, everything my grandmother left me when she passed, to help him get his MBA. $43,000, every penny I had. He promised we'd build our life together. He promised that when he made it big, we'd make it big together. I believed him. For 3 years, I worked those 3 jobs he just mocked. I worked the law firm during the day, cleaned offices at night, and did freelance bookkeeping on weekends. I did it so he could network, so he could attend the right conferences, so he could buy the right suits to impress the right people. I ate plain bread and water for dinner so he could take clients to fancy restaurants. I wore the same 4 dresses for 2 years so he could lease a car that made him look successful. And it worked. Alfred got hired at Westbridge Industries, a mid-sized tech company with huge potential. Within 2 years, he was climbing fast. Within 3 years, he was being groomed for an executive position. And somewhere in those 3 years, he started looking at me different, started coming home later, started suggesting I should do something with myself instead of working those embarrassing jobs. The divorce papers came on a Tuesday, our 5th anniversary. He didn't even have the courage to hand them to me himself. His lawyer delivered them to the law firm where I worked. My boss pulled me into his office with sympathy in his eyes, and I knew before I even saw the manila envelope what it was. The grounds were simple, irreconcilable differences. He wanted the furniture, he wanted the car, he wanted out. I signed them the same day. What else could I do? You can't force someone to love you. You can't force someone to remember the sacrifices you made when they're too busy looking at the future they want, a future that doesn't include you. My sister Naomi took me in. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment and gave me her couch for 8 months. She held me while I cried every night for the first 3 weeks. She let me rage and scream and break down without judgment. And when I was finally empty of tears, when I was finally just numb and hollow, she sat me down at her tiny kitchen table and said something I'll never forget. Rebecca, you're not broken, you're broken open. There's a difference. Broken means you're finished. Broken open means there's finally room for something new to grow. I didn't believe her then, but I wanted to. The letter came 4 months after the divorce was finalized. A thick cream envelope with embossed lettering, from a law firm I'd never heard of. My hands shook as I opened it because I thought maybe Alfred was coming after me for something else, some other piece of my dignity he wanted to strip away. Instead, it was about my grandmother. My sweet grandmother Ivy, who'd raised me after my parents died, who'd worked as a seamstress her whole life, who'd lived in the same small house for 40 years. The grandmother whose funeral I'd paid for with the last of my credit. The grandmother Alfred hadn't even attended the service for because he had an important client dinner. The letter explained that my grandmother had been more than a seamstress, much more. In her youth, she'd been one of the original employees at a small startup called Morrison Tech. She'd worked in their factory, sewing the protective covers for their first computer components. The company had been struggling, and the founder, a kind man named William Morrison, had given his employees something unusual as a Christmas bonus one year because he couldn't afford cash: stock options. Most employees sold them immediately. They needed the money. My grandmother kept hers, not because she understood investing, but because Mr. Morrison had been kind to her, had treated her with respect when the world usually didn't, and she wanted to honor that. She'd kept those shares for 47 years. Morrison Tech had grown, slowly at first, then explosively in the last decade. They'd gone public. They'd merged with other companies. They'd become one of the largest tech suppliers in the country. And my grandmother's original shares, the ones she'd tucked away in a safety deposit box and almost forgotten about, had split and grown and multiplied until they represented something extraordinary. The lawyer explained it to me 3 times before I could process it. My grandmother had owned 0.7% of Morrison Tech when she died. 0.7% doesn't sound like much until you realize Morrison Tech was valued at $12 billion. She'd left it all to me. I sat in that law office for 2 hours, staring at documents I couldn't quite believe were real. The lawyer was patient. He explained that the shares were mine, that they'd been transferred into a trust when my grandmother passed, that I'd been named as the beneficiary, and that I now owned $84 million worth of one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. I threw up in their bathroom twice. The money was one thing. The shock of it, the absolute impossibility of it, the way it changed everything in a single moment. But there was something else the lawyer told me that made my skin go cold and hot at the same time. Morrison Tech had recently acquired a smaller company, a company that had been making waves, growing fast, becoming a serious player in the tech industry. That company was called Westbridge Industries. Alfred's company. The company he'd climbed so hard to conquer, the company he'd sacrificed our marriage to succeed in, was now owned by the parent company where I was a major shareholder. I didn't tell anyone at first, not even Naomi. I needed time to think, to process, to figure out what this meant. The shares were held in a trust with my grandmother's maiden name, so there was no public connection to me. The board of Morrison Tech knew about the major shareholders, but my grandmother had never attended meetings, never made waves, never drawn attention to herself. I could have stayed invisible. I could have just collected the dividends, lived quietly, never let Alfred know. But then I started paying attention, started watching Westbridge from the outside, started seeing the news articles and industry reports. Alfred had been promoted. He was now Chief Operations Officer. He was making decisions that affected hundreds of employees. And from what I could see, those decisions were more about making himself look good than actually helping people. He'd laid off 30 people the week before Christmas to improve quarterly numbers. He'd cut benefits to boost profit margins. He'd killed a mentorship program that helped young people from poor backgrounds get into tech, the exact kind of program that might have helped someone like me. He'd become exactly the kind of person he'd once claimed he wanted to fight against. I started attending Morrison Tech shareholder meetings, quietly at first. I sat in the back, listened, learned. I met other board members. I asked questions. I discovered that while I held less than 1%, that 1% still made me one of the 20 largest individual shareholders. I had a voice if I wanted to use it. It took me a year to build relationships, to understand the business, to position myself not as some lucky granddaughter, but as someone who genuinely cared about the company's direction. I learned everything I could about tech, about business strategy, about corporate governance. I read until my eyes burned. I hired advisors who taught me what questions to ask. And slowly, carefully, I started pushing for changes at Westbridge through my position at Morrison Tech. I pushed for the restoration of the mentorship program. I questioned the layoffs. I demanded better treatment for lower-level employees. I did it all through proxies and representatives at first, never showing my face at Westbridge itself. Alfred had no idea who was suddenly making his life difficult. He just knew that Morrison Tech, his parent company, was suddenly paying very close attention to his division and questioning his decisions. I heard through industry contacts that he was furious, that he'd ranted in meetings about corporate interference and people who don't understand how to run a real business. It would have been enough. I could have stopped there. I was making a difference, protecting people, using my unexpected power for something good. But then Melissa happened. I'd known Alfred was dating someone. I'd seen the photos on social media, seen him moving on while I was still sleeping on my sister's couch. It hurt, but I'd accepted it. What I didn't know until later was how he'd met her. Melissa had been an intern at Westbridge, 22 years old, fresh out of college, working in the marketing department. Alfred was her supervisor's supervisor. He was 34. He had power over her career, her future. He'd started dating her 2 months before our divorce was final. I found out because a former Westbridge employee reached out to me. She'd heard I was asking questions about company culture, and she wanted to tell me about the environment Alfred had created, about how he'd pushed out people who questioned him, about how several young women had left the company after being made uncomfortable by his attention, about how Melissa had been one of several interns he'd pursued, and she'd been the one who said yes because she was young and flattered and didn't understand, yet what it meant to be with someone who saw her as a trophy instead of a person. They'd gotten married 6 months ago. Melissa had quit her job at Westbridge shortly after because Alfred didn't want his wife working. He wanted her available for the dinners and galas and networking events that came with his position. In photos, she smiled, but if you looked close, really close, you could see something familiar in her eyes, something I recognized because I'd seen it in my own mirror for years. That's when I decided to stop being invisible. The annual Morrison Tech and subsidiaries Gala was the biggest event of the year. Every executive from every division attended. It was a show of power, a networking opportunity, and a chance for the leadership to pat themselves on back while pretending they cared about charity. I'd received an invitation as a major shareholder. I'd never attended before. This year I RSVP'd yes. I didn't tell Alfred. Why would I? We hadn't spoken since the divorce. As far as he knew, I was still that poor ex-wife who disappeared into poverty. I bought a simple black dress. Not designer, not flashy. I didn't need flash. I did my own hair and makeup. I took a cab to the hotel. And when I walked into that ballroom, I saw him immediately. Saw him holding court near the bar, Melissa on his arm like an accessory, both of them laughing with other executives. He didn't notice me at first. Why would he? I was just another person in the crowd. I got a drink. I talked to other board members I'd gotten to know over the past year. I waited. It was about 30 minutes into the event when Alfred's eyes finally landed on me across the room. I watched the recognition hit, watched his expression change from casual interest to confusion to something ugly. He said something to Melissa. She looked over at me and I saw curiosity in her face but not meanness. Not yet. Alfred started walking toward me. His face was red. His jaw was tight. What the hell are you doing here? His voice was low, but the venom in it was sharp enough to cut. This is an executive event, Rebecca. Did you sneak in? Are you catering? People around us started to notice, started to turn and watch. I was invited, I said quietly. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed steady. I have every right to be here. He laughed, actually laughed, loud enough that more people turned. Invited? By who? Did you con someone, or are you here looking for handouts? At this point, no one in the room understood what was really happening. And before I tell you, please subscribe and like this video, because what comes next changes everything. The crowd was gathering now. I could see Melissa pushing through, looking confused and uncomfortable. That's when Alfred made his mistake. That's when he decided this was a moment to show off, to humiliate me in front of everyone. He raised his champagne glass. He projected his voice across the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my ex-wife. He said it like he was introducing a circus act. This is Rebecca. 5 years ago, she was barely scraping by as a secretary, and judging by that dress and those shoes, I'd say not much has changed. People laughed, not everyone but enough. I heard she's been working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. Probably came here hopping to steal food from the buffet table. More laughter. He was playing to the crowd now, feeding off their response. Melissa looked uncomfortable. She touched his arm like she wanted him to stop, but he shrugged her off. You know what the saddest part is, Alfred continued. She used to be my biggest supporter, used to work herself to death to help me succeed, and look at me now. He gestured around the room, Chief Operations Officer, and look at her. He pointed at me with his glass. Still nobody. The room had gone quiet except for a few scattered chuckles. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others looked hungry for drama. I took a breath. I set down my drink. I looked at Alfred straight on. Are you finished? My voice carried calm and clear. He blinked. He hadn't expected me to speak up. He'd expected me to run, to cry, to disappear like I had before. Because if you are, I continued, I think there's something you should know. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope I'd brought. Inside was a single document, a letter from the Morrison Tech board on official letterhead confirming my shareholder status and position. I walked forward. The crowd parted. I handed the envelope to Alfred. He opened it, confused, annoyed. I watched his face as he read, watched the color drain out of it, watched his hand start to shake. What is this? His voice had changed. The arrogance was gone. Now there was just confusion and the first hint of fear. That's a letter confirming that I am one of the 20 largest individual shareholders in Morrison Tech, I said clearly. The parent company that owns Westbridge Industries, the company you work for, Alfred. The room erupted in whispers. Someone gasped. I saw phones coming out, people starting to record. Alfred's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. The woman you just publicly humiliated, I continued. The woman whose sacrifices you've spent the last 5 years trying to forget. The woman you threw away because she wasn't good enough for your new life. She's one of the people who actually owns the company you're so proud of working for. Melissa's hand had dropped from Alfred's arm. She was staring at him with wide eyes. That $43,000 you let me spend on your MBA. I kept going, my voice steady even though my entire body was shaking inside. That was my inheritance from my grandmother, the same grandmother whose funeral you didn't attend, the same grandmother who happened to be an original employee of Morrison Tech and who held onto her shares for almost 50 years. Alfred's face had gone from white to red to white again. He looked like he might pass out. For the past year, I said, I've been the one pushing Morrison Tech to question your decisions at Westbridge. I'm the one who fought to restore the mentorship program you cut. I'm the one who demanded better treatment for your employees. That corporate interference you've been complaining about. That was me. The silence in the room was absolute. 300 people holding their breath. So no, Alfred. I didn't come here to steal food. I came here to watch you finally realize what you threw away. Not my money, not my shares. Those are just paper and numbers. I paused. You threw away someone who actually loved you, someone who believed in you when you were nobody, someone who would have celebrated every success with you instead of just using it to feel superior to others. I looked at Melissa then, really looked at her. And I came here to make sure your new wife knows what kind of man she's married to, not because I want him back. God knows I don't. But because she deserves to know before she wastes the best years of her life on someone who sees her as a possession instead of a partner. Melissa's eyes had filled with tears. She looked at Alfred, then at me, then back at Alfred. Is it true? She whispered. Did she really pay for your MBA? Did she work 3 jobs while you? Melissa, don't listen to her, Alfred cut in desperately. She's bitter, she's lying, I'm not lying, I said quietly. And I'm not bitter, I'm just done being invisible. I turned then. I started to walk toward the exit. The crowd parted for me like water. Behind me I heard Alfred calling my name, heard desperation in his voice, heard him trying to follow me. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The story could have ended there. In some ways, maybe it should have. I'd gotten my moment. I'd watched Alfred's face crumble as he realized exactly what he'd lost and exactly who I'd become. But life isn't a story with neat endings. Life is messy and complicated, and sometimes the revenge you thought would feel sweet just leaves you feeling hollow. I left the gala. I got in my cab. I went back to the apartment I'd bought 6 months earlier, a small but beautiful place with big windows and room for all the books I'd always wanted to own. And I cried. Not because I regretted what I'd done, not because I wanted Alfred back, but because even in victory, even in vindication, I couldn't get back those years. Couldn't erase the nights I'd sobbed into my sister's couch cushions. Couldn't undo the feeling of being told I wasn't enough. Money didn't fix that. Power didn't fix that. Watching Alfred's public humiliation didn't fix that. The wound was still there. It would always be there. But maybe Naomi was right. Maybe I wasn't broken. Maybe I was just broken open, and all that pain had made room for something new to grow. My phone started ringing at midnight. Alfred's number. I didn't answer. He called 16 more times that night. I blocked him after the 5th. In the morning, my phone was full of messages from people I barely knew, industry contacts, other shareholders, even some reporters who'd somehow gotten my number. The video from the gala had gone viral. Someone had recorded the whole thing and posted it online. By morning, it had 7 million views. By afternoon, 15 million. The comments were vicious. Most were directed at Alfred, calling him every name you could imagine. Some were directed at me, calling me a gold digger, saying I'd planned this all along, saying I was just as bad as he was. I didn't read them after the first few hundred. I knew better. The internet didn't know our story. They just knew the 30 seconds of drama they'd seen. What mattered more were the other messages. The ones from former Westbridge employees, thanking me for speaking up. The ones from young women in tech who said watching me stand up to Alfred had given them courage to speak up about their own experiences. The one from Melissa. It came 3 days after the gala. Just a simple text from an unknown number. This is Melissa. I need to talk to you, please. We met at a quiet coffee shop far from downtown. She was there first, sitting in the back corner, hands wrapped around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. She looked different than she had at the gala, smaller somehow, younger. The makeup was gone, the designer dress replaced with jeans and a sweater. She looked like what she was, a 24-year-old woman who'd gotten in way over her head. I filed for divorce, she said as soon as I sat down. No hello, no preamble. Yesterday. My lawyer says I have grounds based on fraud and coercion. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. I knew something was off, Melissa continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I knew it from the beginning, but I didn't want to see it. He was older, successful, charming. He made me feel special. I thought I was lucky. She laughed bitterly. Turns out I was just convenient. Melissa. No, let me finish. She looked up at me then, and I saw something fierce in her eyes despite the tears. I need to tell you this. I need you to know that I didn't know about you. Didn't know what he'd done, how he'd treated you. He told me you two had just grown apart, said it was mutual, said you'd both moved on. Most divorces are more complicated than people admit, I said gently. He lied about everything. The words came out choked. After the gala, I started asking questions, started digging, found out about the interns before me who left the company, found out he'd been cheating on you before the divorce, found out about the money you spent on him, the sacrifices you made. She wiped her eyes roughly. I was so stupid, so incredibly stupid. You weren't stupid, I said firmly. You were young and he was in a position of power over you. That's not the same thing. I helped him hurt you. Her voice broke. That night at the gala, I stood there on his arm while he mocked you. I laughed at his jokes about you being poor. I didn't know, but that doesn't matter. I still did it. You're not responsible for his choices, I told her. And you're not responsible for how he treated me. That's on him, all of it. We sat in silence for a while. Other customers came and went. The coffee shop sounds filled the space between us. What are you going to do now? I finally asked. Melissa took a shaky breath. Start over, I guess. Figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be Mrs. Alfred Wright. Go back to work, maybe. Do something that actually matters instead of just looking pretty at events. She paused. And therapy. Definitely therapy. I smiled at that. Therapy is good. Highly recommend. Can I ask you something? Melissa looked at me with those young eyes that had seen too much too fast. How did you do it? How did you survive when everything fell apart? I thought about my answer carefully. I had my sister. I had people who reminded me I was worth more than how Alfred saw me. And eventually, I had a lot of anger that I channeled into becoming someone who could protect other people from going through what I went through. Did the revenge feel good? She asked quietly, seeing his face when he realized. For about 30 seconds, I admitted. Then it just felt empty, because revenge doesn't actually heal anything. It doesn't give you back the time you lost or the person you were before you got hurt. Then what does heal it? I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Time, work, therapy, building a life that's actually yours instead of a life you think you're supposed to want, and mostly just waking up every day and choosing to keep going even when it's hard. She nodded, she understood. I could see it in her face. We talked for another hour. About her plans, about resources that might help her, about the messy reality of starting over. When we finally left that coffee shop, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope, not for me and Alfred, not even really for me, but for her, for Melissa, this young woman who'd gotten caught up in someone else's damage and was finding the courage to walk away. The fallout from the gala continued for weeks. The video kept circulating. News outlets picked up the story. Morrison Tech released a statement saying they were reviewing leadership practices at all subsidiary companies. It was corporate speak for Alfred's in trouble. I got calls from the board. They wanted to know what I wanted, what my plans were, whether I was going to push for Alfred's termination. I thought about it. God knows I thought about it. I could have ended his career with a word, could have made sure he never worked in tech again. But that's not why I'd gone to that gala. That's not why I'd spoken up. I'd gone there to take back my voice, to remind him and myself that I was worth more than the story he'd told about me. I'd already done that. The rest wasn't my responsibility. I want the mentorship program fully funded and expanded, I told the board. I want mandatory training on power dynamics and workplace relationships for all management. I want an independent review of Westbridge's culture and any complaints that have been filed and ignored. And I want protection for any employees who come forward with concerns. And regarding Mr. Wright's position, the board chair asked carefully. That's your decision, I said. I'm not interested in personal vendettas. I'm interested in making sure the company treats people right. If Alfred can do that, fine. If he can't, then do what needs to be done. They did. 3 weeks later, Alfred was quietly moved to a special projects role with no direct reports and no decision-making power. It wasn't a firing. It was something more humiliating, a clear signal that he no longer mattered. I heard he took it hard. Heard he started drinking more, got bitter, blamed everyone but himself. I felt a twinge of something when I heard that. Not quite pity, not quite satisfaction, just a sad recognition that some people never learn, never grow, never look in the mirror and accept responsibility for their choices. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I moved on, really moved on, not just pretended to. I used my position on the board to push for real changes, not just at Westbridge but across all Morrison Tech subsidiaries. Better parental leave, mental health resources, protection for whistleblowers, programs to help people from disadvantaged backgrounds break into tech. I became known not as Alfred's ex-wife or the woman from the viral video, but as someone who actually gave a damn about using power to help people instead of just accumulating more of it. I started dating again, slowly, carefully, with a lot more awareness of red flags and a lot less willingness to ignore my own needs. I rebuilt my relationship with Naomi, who I'd pulled away from during the darkest times. We started having Sunday dinners again, like we used to. I even started a foundation in my grandmother's name, using some of the dividend money to provide interest-free loans to women trying to start businesses or go back to school. The kind of help I'd wished I'd had all those years ago. Life got good, not perfect, not pain-free, but good in a real, substantive way that I'd never experienced before. And sometimes, late at night, I'd think about Alfred, about the man he'd been when we met, before ambition turned him cruel, about the life we might have had if he'd remembered that success means nothing if you lose yourself to get it. But mostly I thought about my grandmother, about her quiet dignity, about her working in that factory for decades, treating everyone with kindness, holding onto those shares not because she understood their value, but because she wanted to honor someone who'd been good to her. She'd given me more than money. She'd given me proof that how you treat people matters, that small acts of loyalty and kindness can grow into something powerful, that the choices you make when nobody's watching are the ones that define you. I was standing at her grave on a Sunday afternoon 6 months after the gala when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Hello? Rebecca, a man's voice, unfamiliar. This is Edward Harrison. I'm an attorney representing Alfred Wright. My stomach dropped. What does he want? Mr. Wright would like to meet with you. He says it's important. He's asked me to arrange it on neutral ground with me present if you'd prefer. Why would I agree to that? He says he has something to tell you, something you deserve to hear. I almost said no, almost hung up, but something in the lawyer's voice made me pause. He sounded tired, like this was a duty call but not a pleasant one. One meeting, I finally said. Public place you present, 1 hour. Thank you, I'll send details. We met at a park. The lawyer sat on a bench 15 feet away, close enough to intervene if needed but far enough to give us privacy. Alfred looked terrible. He'd lost weight. His clothes hung wrong. His face was drawn and pale. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 6 months. Thank you for coming, he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of the arrogance I remembered. You have 1 hour, I replied. I stayed standing. Didn't sit next to him on the bench. kept my distance. "I'm in therapy," he started. "4 times a week. My therapist says I need to make amends, not for me, for the people I hurt. She says I need to acknowledge what I did without expecting forgiveness." I said nothing. "You were right about everything." He looked down at his hands. "I threw away the best thing in my life because I was so obsessed with becoming someone important that I forgot what actually mattered. I used you. I took everything you gave me and convinced myself I deserved it, that I'd somehow earned it." "Is this the part where you ask me to forgive you?" I asked flatly. "No." He looked up then, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, genuine shame. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, I know that. I just needed you to hear me say it. You were never the problem. You were never holding me back. I was just too much of a coward to admit that I was scared. Scared I wasn't good enough, scared I'd fail, scared I'd always be that poor kid from the bad neighborhood. So you decided to make me feel small so you could feel big." "Yes," simple, direct, no excuses. "And I'm sorry, not because sorry fixes anything. Not because it gives you back what I took, but because you deserve to hear it. You deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved better than me." We stood there in silence. A breeze moved through the trees. Children played on the playground nearby. Life continued around us, indifferent to our small human drama. "I hope you find peace, Alfred," I finally said. "I really do. I hope you figure out who you are when you're not trying to prove something, but I can't help you with that. That's your work to do." "I know," he nodded. "I just needed to tell you, needed to look you in the eye and admit what I did. My therapist says that's the first step." "Then I hope you take the rest of them." I turned to leave. "Rebecca." I stopped, didn't turn around. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm proud of you. What you're doing with the foundation, the changes you've made at Morrison Tech. You're exactly who I should have been, who I wish I'd been." I didn't respond, I just walked away, this time finally for good. The lawyer called me a week later. Said Alfred wanted me to know he'd resigned from Westbridge entirely. Said he was moving back to his hometown to be closer to his mother, to figure out his life away from the world that had twisted him into someone he didn't recognize. I hoped it worked out for him, not because I cared about him anymore, but because I believed people could change. Had to believe it. Otherwise, what was the point of any of this? A year later, almost to the day after the gala, I stood in front of a room full of young women at the first annual Morrison Foundation scholarship ceremony. I looked at their faces, saw their hunger and hope and determination, and I felt my grandmother's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. "Success isn't about how high you climb," I told them. "It's about who you are when you get there. It's about whether you use your power to lift others up or to push them down. It's about whether you remember the people who helped you or whether you convince yourself you did it all alone." I paused, looked at each of their faces. Every one of you in this room has already overcome obstacles that would have broken other people. You've worked while going to school. You've supported families. You've pushed through doubt and fear and voices telling you that you don't belong. The money we're giving you today will help, but it's not what's going to make you successful. What's going to make you successful is remembering this moment, remembering what it felt like to need help. And when you finally make it, when you finally get to where you're going, you remember to send the elevator back down. They applauded, some were crying, so was I. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 19. Her scholarship certificate was clutched in trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means. My mom is sick, and I'm working 2 jobs, and I was about to drop out because I couldn't afford next semester," and she broke off, crying too hard to continue. I hugged her, this stranger, this young woman who reminded me so much of who I'd been. "You're going to make it," I told her. "It's going to be hard, and there will be days you want to give up, but you're going to make it. And someday, you're going to be standing where I am, helping someone else." She nodded against my shoulder, believed me, believed in the future I was promising her. And standing there in that moment, I finally understood what my grandmother had been trying to teach me all along. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about the choice to be kind even when the world is cruel, to be generous even when you have little, to hold on to your dignity and your values even when it costs you everything. That night I went home to my apartment, made dinner, called Naomi and told her about the ceremony, laughed with her about something stupid, made plans for Sunday dinner. My life wasn't dramatic anymore, wasn't defined by revenge or vindication or proving something to someone who'd hurt me. It was just mine, quietly, peacefully, beautifully mine. And somewhere, I like to think my grandmother was smiling. Because in the end, she'd given me more than money. She'd given me proof that how you treat people when you have nothing is exactly who you are when you have everything. And she'd shown me that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming someone you're proud of, someone who uses their pain to prevent others from hurting the same way, someone who breaks the cycle instead of continuing it. I'd never see Alfred again, never know if he truly changed or if his apology was just another performance. And I realized, lying in bed that night, that it didn't matter. His story was his to write now. Mine was finally my own. So if you made it to the end of this story, if you felt something in your chest, if you saw yourself in these struggles or these victories, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button because this channel is full of stories about real people facing real challenges and finding their way through. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it gets better, that their value isn't determined by someone else's opinion, that pain can become power if you channel it right. And most importantly, remember this: your worth isn't measured by who stayed. It's measured by who you become after they leave. Your story isn't over just because someone walked out of it. Sometimes the best chapters come after the ending you thought would destroy you. Now go write your next chapter, make it beautiful, make it true, make it yours. Thanks for watching.